Welcome to the Improve81 podcast, a series of conversations about how the Interstate 81 Corridor Improvement Program is working to enhance safety and traffic flow on I-81 in Virginia. The CIP, also known as Improve81, provides the Virginia Department of Transportation with guidance and funding for roughly $3 billion worth of construction projects and operational improvements. I'm Ken Slack, Communications Coordinator for Improve81, and today we're focused on the environmental challenges of a program with dozens of projects spread across the interstate's 325 miles in Virginia. Now, joining me today are Robin Simpson, VDOT Salem District Environmental Manager, and Dave Covington, VDOT's I-81 Program Delivery Director. And I thank you both very much for being here today. So, Robin, I will start with you. So what exactly does environmental staff do when it comes to interstate corridor improvement projects?
So for any federal funded infrastructure project, we create a document that includes all the potential environmental impacts and make it available to the public. So these documents can include potential impacts to air, water quality and soil, threatened and endangered species, and noise. This documentation can also encompass review of cultural resources, which are archaeological reviews for historic lands and architectural reviews for historic buildings. All of these reviews are performed and coordinated with the appropriate agencies. The goal is to understand these potential impacts and to try to avoid and minimize them.
But it's not just about following state and federal regulations and guidelines. It's also about VDOT making sure it's doing the right thing for the Commonwealth.
Yeah, we want to show that we are providing environmental stewardship because we live in the community and we want to make it a great place for everybody to use and live.
I mean, this is a beautiful corridor we have here, and we want to preserve that while improving transportation infrastructure at the same time. Makes a lot of sense. So tell me a little bit about some of the threatened and endangered species you mentioned that you work on to avoid while we're moving forward on I-81 project.
So a lot of times when you're thinking transportation projects, you may not necessarily think about threatened and endangered species, but they are a huge part of our projects, and we spend a lot of time trying to make sure they're protected. We have several species along the I-81 corridor that we consider in our review. In our district alone, we've got several bats. We have the Indiana bat, the northern long-eared bat, and the tricolored bat. We look for them underneath bridges. We do acoustic surveys to see if they're flying through our projects, to see if we need to avoid certain areas that they may like to be in. We also assess streams and wetland areas for any suitable habitats for potential threatened and endangered species, such as the Roanoke log perch, the James spiny mussel, and the yellow lance mussel. We also have the smooth coneflower and the Virginia fringe mountain snail that's in the Salem area. Some of these species can only be found during certain times of the year, so it makes going out and evaluating them difficult at times, but we get that done and then we do our coordination so that we can move on with the project.
So if you do spot evidence of these protected species or see them in person, so to speak, what steps do you take?
So if they are there, we will take pictures, we will document where they were or where the potential habitat for them is, and then we would go back and coordinate with the appropriate agency and let them know, hey, we found potential habitat, or we actually found the species. We have this project that's going to be in this area. How would you like us to go about mitigating or making sure that we do not impact them? A lot of times we will offer up, we can do a time of year, or we can just avoid this area. They have certain years where it could be breeding, or it's the certain time of years that they actually migrate. So they would not want us to impact those areas or during that time frame.
This sounds like a lot of work, and this cannot possibly just be a job to you. Why do you do this?
I do it because a long time ago, I decided I really liked the species side of things. But I got into it because I really wanted to protect the species that were out there and how we could go about making sure how we live doesn't impact them for the future. Bats are a good example. You know, people will say, well, why are we protecting the bats? They eat the insects that help us out in the long run. We don't want to wipe out something that can help us further down the road. So that's kind of why I got into it, and then expanded from there with water quality. I didn't realize how things really were with water quality till I got into it, and then it kind of became one of those things of, okay, I get this and I want to protect it for other people, my kids included.
Now, Dave, your official job title is not environmental, but you work alongside these environmental experts up and down the corridor. Why is it important to you?
You know, for one, I live in a community where decades ago, the river that runs through the community was polluted in a really bad way. We're still dealing with that. It affects our community on a daily basis. In addition to that, when I'm outside of work, I'm also a caver. So I do work with organizations that protect caves. So that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I do pay very close attention when we are in karst environments, which we are along the I-81 corridor. Historically, I've hiked a lot of the Appalachian Trail. I would love to see that stay the way it is and not be impacted. We are working in close proximity to the Appalachian Trail, specifically the project from I-81 north up to Troutville. The Appalachian Trail kind of runs parallel to the interstate there, and we are avoiding impacts to the Appalachian Trail. I've constructed my own habitat project. When we talk about our pollinator areas, I've constructed a 17-acre habitat project that was not only for animals, but also really aimed at repairing the soil that had been depleted over decades and decades of farming activity. So I see the benefit of what we're doing with regard to environmental impacts and trying to really minimize our footprint. And that really shows with the projects that we've been delivering along the I-81 corridor, where our primary focus is to utilize the median area, minimize our footprint where we can, avoid environmental impacts. So it is important to me.
And what you talked about, that example of widening to the inside toward the median, that's something we do throughout the corridor, whether we're from Bristol all the way to Winchester. What are some of the sort of common concerns, no matter what part of the corridor we're talking about?
Well, there are certainly common themes that exist along the entire corridor. And I know there's a lot of coordination among our environmental professionals statewide related to stream impacts and control of runoff from our roadways. We build control methods into the design of projects such as stormwater management facilities and perform environmental compliance inspections during project construction to ensure that erosion control plans are functioning properly. In contrast to that, there are unique situations that arise in all districts. Some watersheds are more protected than others and require more extensive protective measures. Black's Run in the Harrisonburg area is a really good example of that. Black's Run is an impaired stream, and the city of Harrisonburg has taken great measure to not only further protect that, but to enhance it. And we certainly want to contribute to that. So we are planning that in the design phase, and we'll certainly account for that in the construction phase of the widening through that area. Some geology is unique to certain areas. Along I-81, there are many areas that have karst features. Karst means that there's limestone present that can be dissolved and form into caves. We must account for that not only for the roadway and bridge foundations, but also for drainage runoff. Caves are generally protected, and we do not want to direct roadway runoff into caves. We need to ensure that we are always compliant with the environmental laws, which is why we consult with environmental specialists frequently and regularly and look for information from our environmental specialists with regard to changes in regulations. One example of a unique situation is the Cedar Creek Battlefield in the Strasburg area. We have two projects between I-66 and Route 55 to the south to widen I-81 to 3 lanes. We are coordinating with our environmental professionals and regulatory agencies to ensure that we minimize or eliminate any impacts to these valuable cultural resources.
And Dave mentioned a few minutes ago the pollinator habitat, and I know that we have one in the Salem district, very close to I-81, that VDOT stewards.
Yes, we have one that actually came about with the Exit 150 project several years ago, and it is a habitat that was established and protected for bees, butterflies, and any other pollinators there. When you're driving by, it may look just like weeds, but do know that we did put special pollinator species of plants and trees out there to attract the bees and butterflies and other species that may use that area. Since this habitat is not a regulatory requirement, VDOT shows a desire to maintain the pollinator habitat due to the immense benefits of having that in this area.
So that's not a regulatory requirement, something that VDOT, again, like we talked about earlier, is just the right thing to do. But a lot of the work that we do in environmental involves, coordination and constant communication with state and federal agencies. What are some of the ones that you have the close relationships with, so to speak?
There are many state and federal agencies that have an interest in the work that we're doing and would require coordination at the state level. Just to name a few, we have the Department of Environmental Quality, Wildlife Resources, and Historic Resources. So as far as federal agencies, we deal with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Federal Highway Administration, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Each of these agencies has their own time frame for review, and we may have to send them multiple versions of our information to make sure we're meeting all their regulations and laws. Sometimes there are changes, especially when it comes to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They will be adding on new threatened and endangered species, so we may have to go back and coordinate with them again to make sure we're still in compliance.
That does mean sometimes that VDOT needs to take extra steps. For example, if we realize that that there is a stream or wetland that we cannot completely avoid, what are some of the things that we do in those cases?
When we're developing a project, we're tasked with looking at that project area and seeing what streams and wetlands may be in that particular project area. So what we do at that point is we will come back and let the project manager or the designer know, here in this area we have so many streams and wetlands. And when they're designing that, the goal is for them to try to avoid those areas altogether, but that's not always possible. So then we ask them to try to minimize that as much as possible as well. So what may happen in the end is, depending on the level of impact, we may have to go through and replace a portion of that stream or wetland within the same watershed.
So we've been talking a lot about streams, water quality, wetlands, protected species, that sort of thing. Sort of what you might think of as traditional environmental efforts. But Dave, you mentioned earlier very briefly about Cedar Creek Battlefield. That sort of touches on one of those other areas that come underneath environmental challenges that VDOT addresses head on. What are some other examples?
Many of our projects are in close proximity of cultural resources, and it's important to perform our due diligence in coordination with the agencies that have jurisdiction over those resources. Noise barriers are also something that needs to be considered for all of our projects. We perform a noise analysis to determine if there are impacts to adjacent parcels. Regarding air quality, all of our construction contracts include language regarding federal and local air quality requirements. While these requirements can be very complex when it comes to equipment emissions, I can provide an example of air quality compliance that's a little more simple. We do require contractors to control dust on the construction site. The process generally involves wetting the dirt before disturbing it when the ground and atmosphere are very dry. We also monitor atmospheric conditions and can restrict work on high ozone days.
A lot of what we were talking about earlier touched on efforts during the scoping and the planning and design of projects, but what you were just talking about, that's just one example of what happens after we turn a project over to a construction team.
Yes, Ken. VDOT has performed environmental compliance inspection during the construction phase for many years. However, this process has been improving year after year. The most notable improvements have been the increase in the involvement of environmental specialists and the frequency of construction site visits. On many contracts, we also require the contractor to have an environmental specialist on their team. Contractors understand the sensitivity of environmental impacts, and collectively, VDOT and the contracting industry have a clear understanding of the importance of environmental compliance. That will continue to be of paramount importance.
Dave Covington, I-81 Program Delivery Director, and Robin Simpson, VDOT Salem District Environmental Manager. I want to thank you both for being here today and sharing your thoughts and expertise on exactly how VDOT addresses environmental concerns along I-81 in Virginia. And I also want to thank you, the listeners of this Improve81 podcast. VDOT now has dozens of these podcasts as well as videos that help show and tell what's happening on the I-81 corridor. Check out our videos, podcasts, quarterly newsletters, an interactive map, and a whole lot more resources by visiting Improve81.org. And as always, we wish you safe travels.